There are moments in the life of any institution, any league, any sport, any organization built over decades by the labor and loyalty of thousands of people, when everything that seemed permanent reveals itself to be provisional. When the ground that everyone was standing on turns out to have been shifting for years beneath the surface, and the only reason nobody noticed was because nobody wanted to look. Those moments don't announce themselves with fanfare. They don't arrive with a press release sent at a reasonable hour on a reasonable day. They arrive the way all genuinely seismic things arrive, suddenly, incompletely, in fragments of information that don't yet form a coherent picture but carry in their incompleteness a specific and unmistakable weight. The weight of something enormous having moved, something that cannot be moved back. On a morning that began like every other morning in professional golf, with tee times and weather forecasts and the ordinary machinery of a sport continuing to turn, a story broke that did not behave like a news story. It behaved like a rupture. It spread through the golf community not in the orderly way that information spreads when people are processing facts, but in the electric, disorienting way that information spreads when people are processing shock. Phones lit up in locker rooms. Group chats that had been quiet for months suddenly filled with a single question repeated in different words by different voices, all carrying the same disbelief. The question was simple. The answer was not. The question was, how did we not see this coming? And behind that question, barely spoken, was the one that mattered even more. What happens now? Have you ever watched something you genuinely love change in a way you never agreed to? Tell me in the comments. Because golf fans across the world are feeling something very specific today, and I want to know if you're one of them. And if this channel finds you in moments when the sports world stops making sense and you need someone to put the pieces together honestly, make sure you're here for every story we tell, because this one is far from over. To understand the full weight of what just happened inside the PGA Tour, you have to understand what the PGA Tour actually is, not the logo, not the broadcast rights, not the corporate structure, but the human reality of it. You have to understand what it means to the men who have given their careers to it, to the fans who have organized pieces of their lives around it, and to the smaller ecosystem of caddies and coaches and tournament volunteers and local communities that host events and feel, in some genuine way, that the tour belongs to them as much as it belongs to anyone. The PGA Tour was built slowly, over decades, through a combination of televised moments that became cultural touchstones, personalities that transcended the sport, and a particular promise, implicit but deeply felt, that professional golf in America had a home. A consistent, principled, coherent home. That promise was never written in a contract. It didn't need to be. It was written in the behavior of the institution over time, in the decisions it made, in the values it claimed, in the relationship it cultivated with its players and its public. That kind of promise, the kind built from accumulated trust rather than legal language, is the most powerful kind an institution can make. It is also the most catastrophic kind to break. The turbulence that has defined professional golf over the past several years, the emergence of LIV Golf, the Saudi-backed breakaway league that arrived with financial resources so enormous they effectively redefined what the phrase competing offer could mean, had already tested that promise severely. Players who had built their identities within the PGA Tour framework made decisions that the Tour and many fans found difficult to forgive. Loyalties that seemed fixed revealed themselves to be, under sufficient financial pressure, considerably more flexible. The Tour responded with punishments, then with negotiations, then with a framework agreement announced in the summer of 2023 that was supposed to resolve the conflict. A deal with the Saudi Public Investment Fund that would bring the warring factions of professional golf under a single commercial structure. That deal was supposed to be the resolution, the end of the uncertainty, the moment when everyone exhaled and the sport moved forward. It was not the resolution. It was the beginning of a new and more complicated chapter, one whose latest development is the reason you're watching this right now, and the reason the golf world woke up to a conversation it wasn't fully prepared to have. What exactly broke? What is the news that shook the community so completely that players who are normally disciplined about public statements began speaking out, that fans who have watched golf quietly for years suddenly found their voices, that the institutional language of the Tour, always so careful, always so measured, always so architecturally constructed to communicate control, began to sound, for the first time in memory, like the language of an organization that is not entirely in control. The answer lives in the gap between what was promised and what is being delivered. It lives in the distance between the framework agreement as it was announced, with optimism, with the language of partnership and unity and a unified future for professional golf, and the framework agreement as it is being experienced by the players and stakeholders who were told it would protect their interests and who are now asking, with increasing urgency and decreasing patience, exactly whose interests are being protected and by whom. The specific pressure points that ignited the current crisis involve several interconnected issues that had been building quietly for months before they broke publicly. The governance question, who actually controls decision-making in the new unified structure, and whether PGA Tour players have genuine representation in that process or merely the appearance of it, had been a source of private frustration among the Tour's player advisory groups for the better part of a year. The financial transparency question, how the commercial arrangements being negotiated with outside investors translate into actual outcomes for the players whose performances generate the value being sold, had produced a level of distrust between the Tour's administrative leadership and its membership that even optimistic observers were struggling to characterize as manageable. And then came the specific development, the piece of news that moved all of this from private frustration to public shock, that the structural details of the proposed commercial framework, when examined carefully by independent advisors retained by a group of player representatives, contained provisions that a significant number of senior tour players believe had not been adequately disclosed, adequately explained, or adequately negotiated in their interests. The word that keeps appearing in conversations among players who are willing to speak, even anonymously, is a word that institutional sports organizations dread above almost all others. The word is trust. Not the presence of trust, but its absence. Not the question of whether anyone has done something technically wrong, but the far more corrosive question of whether the people responsible for protecting the interests of the players, the people those players believed were in their corner, were fully in their corner, or were navigating a set of competing priorities that the players were not fully informed about. In an earlier era of tour politics, dissent was largely invisible, managed internally, resolved in rooms that the public never saw, presented to the outside world in the unified language of institutional solidarity. What is different now, and what reflects the broader transformation of how athletes in every major sport understand their own power and their own voice, is that the dissent is not being managed quietly. It is being expressed, not recklessly, not with the abandon of people who have forgotten what they have to lose, but with the specific, careful directness of people who have calculated that the cost of silence now exceeds the cost of speaking. Several players, veterans with enough standing in the game to speak without fear of institutional consequence, have given comments to journalists that represent a significant departure from the traditional diplomatic careful speak of tour politics. The comments share a common theme, that the players feel the process has moved faster than their understanding of it, in directions they did not fully sanction, toward outcomes they were not fully consulted about. One player, speaking without attribution to a major golf publication, used a phrase that has since been widely circulated in golf media. He said the players feel like they have been passengers in a vehicle they thought they were helping to drive. The fan response has been equally significant, and in some ways more emotionally raw. Golf fans occupy a particular relationship with their sport that is different from the relationship fans have with team sports. There is an intimacy to golf fandom, a sense of personal connection to individual players, a feeling of proximity to the human drama that unfolds over 72 holes of stroke play, a genuine investment in the souls of the people they follow. That makes institutional betrayal feel more personal than it might in other sporting contexts. When golf fans feel that the sport they love is being managed in ways that prioritize financial architecture over human integrity, they don't just feel disappointed. They feel something closer to grief. If what you're feeling right now while listening to this is something you recognize, if the idea of an institution you trusted moving in directions you didn't agree to resonates somewhere beyond sport, then this story earned that feeling. And that feeling is worth something. The voices that have shaped professional golf's identity over generations, the players who became the human face of what the tour promised to be, have responded to the current crisis in ways that reveal the depth of the stakes. Some have been vocal in their concern. Others have been conspicuously deliberately silent, which in institutional politics is itself a form of speech. The silence of people who are usually willing to speak is one of the most reliable indicators that what is happening is serious enough to require caution. The caddies, the professionals who walk every yard of every round, who carry not just bags but the weight of their players' mental states, who are among the least economically protected members of the tour ecosystem and the most immediately vulnerable to structural changes, have watched the developments with the particular anxiety of people whose livelihoods depend entirely on decisions made in rooms they will never be invited to enter. Several caddy representatives have spoken to media about their concern that whatever commercial framework emerges from the current negotiations will not have adequately considered the human cost to the people at the bottom of the tour's economic structure. The tournament directors, the men and women who run the individual events that constitute the tour calendar, who negotiate with sponsors and manage local logistics, and are responsible for the fan experience on the ground, have expressed their own form of institutional anxiety. The question of what a transformed commercial structure means for the autonomy of individual events, for the relationship between tour headquarters and the tournaments that give the tour its weekly texture and identity, is one that has not been publicly resolved and is being asked with increasing urgency. So what happens next? That is the question that everyone in professional golf is carrying right now. Players, caddies, officials, fans, journalists, sponsors, and the broader community of people whose investment in the sport goes beyond entertainment into something that feels, however imprecisely, like belonging. The honest answer is that nobody knows. And that unknowing, that genuine institutional uncertainty at the heart of one of the world's most watched and most beloved sports, is not a comfortable place to be. But it is an honest place. And honesty, in this moment, is the most valuable thing the sport can offer the people who love it. What is clear is that the era of professional golf that existed before this breaking point, the era in which the PGA Tour's authority was essentially uncontested, in which the boundaries of the sport were well-defined and the power relationships were stable, and the player's relationship with the institution, whatever its tensions, operated within a framework that everyone broadly understood, that era is over. What replaces it will be determined by decisions that are being made right now, in negotiations that are happening right now, between people whose values and priorities and long-term visions for the sport may or may not align with the values and priorities and visions of the players who fill the leaderboards and the fans who fill the grandstands. The question that matters, the question that this moment in golf history is actually asking, is whether the sport's future will be built in genuine partnership with the people who make it what it is, or whether those people will find themselves, when the documents are signed and